So Ryan, you know that we do we do pickles, don't we?
Oh, we do.
And we do 5 rules.
Yes.
Sort of regular things to try to put a framework around it. Well, for the first time ever, we're going to mix them up.
Oh, 5 pickles?
5 pickles. Yeah. No, 1 pickle, but with 10 things that you need to think about. So
this sounds less like a combination and more like you're just destroying the format, Colin.
It's just a bonus. It's just a bonus for everyone. So what are we talking about today? I've had a number of people reach out to me and basically say that they've been laid off or they're looking for a career change, and they've been asking my advice. So how do you start a consultancy? Because clearly, you know, with recessions coming and all the rest of it, numbers of layoffs there are in the industry. One of the, that's sort of a bit of a life-changing point, and a number of people are starting to go, well, actually, I've always wanted to start my own consultancy, so maybe I should.
I suspect that's secretly the dream, right? For most people who are working in kind of specs and related areas. Like, I think that's pretty common. People,
absolutely
do that.
So I sat down and I've thought of 10 things that if you had come to me asking me some advice on how to create a successful consultancy, here are the 10 things that I would suggest that you need to think about or do. Okay. So I'm going to go through them. 1, be brave and be committed. Okay. And the brave bit is when you've heard me say this before, but there's a really good book that I would suggest that anybody that's in this position reads called Who Moved My Cheese? Okay. I'm sure a number of people have read it. There's one killer question in there that I think is really important, which is, what would you do if you weren't scared? So if you're thinking about doing it, if you're considering the pros and cons, then the danger is that, our old friend loss aversion comes in, and we start thinking about all the negatives and everything else, and then we don't necessarily go away and do it. But think about the answer to that question for you. Now, that doesn't mean that you should then just start it, because there's a number of other things that you have to be realistic about. And one of them is you've got to be committed. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what would you do if you weren't scared, but now also what would you do if you weren't impulsive? So let's
that may be a supplementary book that you could write.
No, but it's a great perspective, right? Like,
yes. Okay.
It depends on your personality, but it's very easy to come up with reasons not to do things, which is why I don't leave the house that often. But if you want to start a consultancy, you need to think more broadly than that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. So, and that sort of does tie into the next one, actually, which is all about the mindset that you need. Okay. And I think this is, again, really important. As I've sat down, it's been quite a cathartic experience to sit down and I actually spoke to Lorraine, my wife, about it, and said to her, what does she think? Because obviously she's seen me over the last 22 years go through this stuff. One is, particularly at the beginning, bearing in mind that I came from a large corporate organization, and then I started up with a colleague of mine who was there for the first year. But we didn't work. We worked together, obviously, but not physically together. And one of the things I've written here is prepared to be lonely. Yeah. Which I know is fine for you, mate, but it's a nightmare for me. But it can be from going from having lots of people around you that you can bounce ideas off to suddenly having one person at the end of a phone, and I don't think Skype was even around at that point. So it can be lonely. That's part of the mindset. The other part of the mindset is not giving up. Okay, because I think I've known people who have started down this route of wanting to set up their own consultancy, and they think it's going to be easy, and it's not. Yeah. They think they're going to get loads of business from their mates who are still back in the company or whatever else, and they don't, and they end up giving up. Okay, and I think that's a really big thing. The other area under mindset is that I've put here is one of the key times for me, and I can always remember that I was on a train on the way into London, and I was starting to sort of think all this stuff through. So bear in mind that this was 20 years ago. Customer experience wasn't really being talked about by anybody. But I'd been running a program on improving it for the last 3 years. And the key bit of mindset was I suddenly realized that I was an expert in this topic. And it wasn't that I didn't know about the topic. I knew a lot about the topic. The problem that I had was nobody knew I was an expert.
Right.
Yeah. And when I got to that realization, I suddenly thought, bloody hell, that means I've got to spend a lot of time telling people that and positioning the fact that I'm an expert and doing things. So we then put in place a whole lot of PR and getting on TV and radio and various different things to effectively show people my knowledge. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you need your bona fides, and those can come from a lot of different places, right? The fact that somebody's heard of you, right, because they've seen you on TV or on radio or something. I mean, that's evidence that you are an expert. If you can point to a book that you've published or white papers that you've published, right, or if you've developed a blog that's created a following. So it's not like there's one path to getting there. But yeah, if you want people to spend thousands, tens of thousands of dollars, to hire you for your expertise, you need to provide some evidence of the expertise. Absolutely.
Yeah. And this is another key thing for me, because in the early days, I was clearly saying I was an expert, okay, because I thought I was. But here's the issue, and it builds on what you were just saying. I don't think you actually are until somebody else tells you you are. And when somebody else says he knows what he's talking about, he's an expert in this topic, et cetera, I think that for me is the measure of whether you've made it or not. I think that's key. And
I mean,
tied into,
not to put too fine a point on it, but if you're hiring a consultant, you are hiring them for their expertise, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
that is your value proposition. Like, that is why somebody would hire you. And so
yes.
the more evidence you can provide for that, the easier you can make it for them to assess that, then the more successful you'll be in getting business. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's clearly one of the reasons. It's one of the reasons why we wrote a book in the first place at the beginning. Yeah, and let me also be clear, I didn't invent that. That's a well-worn path for people to get established. But if you write a book, you're seen to be an expert, and that's because we didn't self-publish. There was very little self-publishing in those days. But if one of the big publishing houses, we had Palgrave Macmillan. If they're willing to put their money where their mouth is, then because they think what you're saying is the right thing, that helps. Okay, a couple of other things under this mindset thing, which I think again are important, particularly if you're coming from the corporate world. One is you move from being a hero to zero. So you move from being. So I was a senior director or vice president, senior vice president, to put it in American terms. and I used to have 3,500 people working for me. If I said jump, people used to say how high. Yeah. And then realizing that when you start up on your own, you don't have any of that. And if you want something done, guess what? You do it yourself. You don't have swathes of people wishing, to do your bidding for you.
You were collating your own copies at that point.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, number 3. So that was under just mindset. I should have had 10 underneath the mindset thing, but I think mindset's
You're really pushing this 5 rules thing to its limit, Colin. I don't respect your
well, I am already, because there were 10. So it's 5 rules with 5 bonus points. So there you go. Number 3 is
3 sub-bullets under each one. Yeah,
that's right. We always like to give value. That's forward. Number 3 is be prepared for hard work. I don't think I've ever worked as hard in my life as I have, and worked weekends, evenings. Yeah, just it's a hell of a lot of hard work. And in a previous podcast we've done, you mentioned the fact that you thought that work-life balance was important. And I totally agree with that. But if you think that, don't do what I did, because it was just work.
I mean, and some of that comes down to the practical response to the fact that you just don't have the people to do some of the stuff, so you end up having to do it yourself, and that just takes time.
And I tell you what, mate, the thing I also learned was it's surprising how long that rubbish stuff takes. To go and get 20 copies of this so you can give a paper copy to somebody. Now, the good thing nowadays is you don't have to do that. But, just to do that, then the printer bloody breaks down and this happens and that happens. So anyway, number 4, this is an important one. Understand and complement your weaknesses. So when I started off, whilst I had large corporate experience, which has been the main part for our marketplace that we've been addressing, so in other words, selling into large corporates, so I know them well, what I didn't have was any small business experience. And running a small business and running a corporate are very different. We ended up partnering with a guy that retired 3 or 4 years ago, and he effectively knew finance, he knew how to run an office, he'd been a serial entrepreneur, and he knew all the things that I didn't know, and that was a bloody good decision, basically.
Yeah, so this is often overlooked, I think, by entrepreneurs, where they have some expertise, some skills that are valuable, and then they go into business not realizing that the running of a small business is an entirely different set of skills.
Yeah.
And there may be like another set of skills around like sales, for instance, that is an entirely different set of skills. And so making a corporation run, even a small business, requires a lot of complementary skills. And it's very, very few people that have all of them, or that have the time to do all of them, even if they did have the skills.
Yes. No, absolutely. I basically I couldn't have done it without Dave, and he knew all of the finances, how to run an office, the problems and pitfalls, and blah 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 blah. And there are a number. Number 5 is, and this is one of the things that I think is really important. The great thing about starting your own company is you can make long-term decisions. So if I just, as an example, think about this podcast. Do you remember when we started talking about this and we deliberated for bloody weeks, it felt like, about should we do it, should we not do it, would we have enough to talk about? You remember those days?
Oh yeah.
And then it was, well, maybe we should do it, but only do it every other week. And we finally went, nah, let's do it every week. And when you start something, and this is just an example, basically, but it's the same, it's true with a number of things. When you start off, you've got to give it a long time. And if I look at the stats of the number of downloads we'd had in the first 6 months, you can't just look at it at that time frame. You've got to look at a much greater time frame. And if I look now, we get about 15,000 downloads every month, 500,000 over the period of time. A lot, basically. And if we'd have started off at that point, you would have gone, of course, well, it's a no-brainer that you should do that. But there you go. Anyway, so making long-term decisions.
Yeah, and like planning for that slow ramp up. So that, like, the little bit of that I've read about entrepreneurship, even very successful small businesses take a while to get to profitability. And they say that the number one problem that entrepreneurs face is that they don't plan far enough ahead for those lean years. So even if you're getting revenue in, just being able to cover those expenses, and it usually takes 2 to 5 years before you can start turning a profit long term, depending on what type of business you're starting. And a lot of people just do not plan that far ahead. They think 6 months or a year and a half. And the reality is, if you're going to make it work, unless you're extraordinarily lucky, it's probably going to take that longer period of time. And so, are you planning for that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in fact, I should have mentioned at the beginning, I was looking at some stats on small businesses, and this is US. So nearly 1 in 5 businesses fail within the first 5 years, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And 65% fail after 10 years. We've been going for 20. I couldn't find a stat on that. But so I guess, again, it's just not in your favor, is it, basically?
Both of those numbers are much more favorable than I would have assumed. I would assume the failure rate would be much higher than that. But,
sure.
That's good.
Okay, number where are we? So number 5 is make long-term decisions. Number 6 is, in my view, you got to have an original thought. So there's no point in going, I'm going to be a consultant. Okay, great. What subject? What's your expertise? Well, in this area. Okay, great. So what are you saying that's different to everybody else? Again, you've heard me say this. For me, it's about zigging when everybody else is zagging. Okay. And I'd always thought that emotions were key. And then over the last, 10 years, started to focus around this behavioral science, because I think that's key. And I think tied in there is another piece, which is you've got to continuously improve and pivot. Because if I started just talking about the same thing I was talking about 20 years ago, nobody would be interested, because everybody's caught up with that thinking now. So you've got to have an original thought. Otherwise, it's a body shop, isn't it? You're employed to come in and write Excel spreadsheets as a consultant, but that's just because and you can get them to a penny, basically.
Yeah, there's this phenomenon in marketing called Me Too branding, where the idea is there's some market leader out there, and then we're going to start an offering, a brand that just cozies up as close as we can get to the existing brand. We'll be as similar as we can in all the possible ways, and then we'll charge a little bit less. And so, we'll be like this. And there are markets where that's viable. I always caution my students, though, that it's risky to not have anything special about your offering other than the lower price, which is what a Me Too strategy generally is. Like, we're going to be as close as we can to this dominant player, but we'll be at lower price. In consulting, that's a disaster. Like, in consulting, I'm looking for expertise. I'm looking for insight. And so the idea that there are going to be a lot of customers out there who are like, get me the cheapest consultant you can find. Like that. That seems like a weird.
Yes.
Like, I want insights, but I also want to save a lot of money.
Sure.
So you need, the value proposition, the value offering is that you've got insights, you've got new ideas to sell. And so if you're not
Yes.
producing that, then you're really undercutting the value you can offer. So you
No,
got to.
absolutely. Yeah. No, I totally agree, and that's a good observation. Number 7, provide value to your customer and provide value to your audience. Okay. And that again sort of ties on with having that original thought. Okay. And again, if I, people sit here, not sit here, but people talk to me and they go, it's all right for you, Colin. You've got 293,000 followers on LinkedIn. You've got 75,000 people on your LinkedIn newsletter. You've written 7 books. It's all right for you. And I say to them, look, how do you think I bloody got there?
Those
By
were
doing these things, and moreover by providing value.
Granted to you at birth. You inherited a large LinkedIn following from your father.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, and just on that, so providing value is key. And just on that, I mean, the newsletter, you and I have spoken about this before, but the newsletter has grown by 65% in a year. 65%. And that's at a time, and this is the LinkedIn newsletter called Why Customers Buy. If you haven't listened to it, subscribe to it, and please do. It's grown by 65%. He's talking about that bit about experts. You know, you're an expert when somebody tells you. And I've had 2 or 3 articles written where they've gone, these are newsletters to follow. Okay. And again, I'm not trying to promote it. I'm just trying to show people's the effect that it has. And that's all based on turning around and going, how can we provide value to our audience? How do we do these podcasts and then the newsletters and everything else that ties on it that has some original thought, provide some insights, and will be valuable for people? And guess what? The measure is how many people subscribe, how many people are followers, etc. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the other thing I would put within that is, and one of the key things that our audience likes, and this is from the feedback that we've got from the reviews that people have written, kindly written to us, is I think the thing that we do is not be pretentious. So we lark about. Have you noticed that? I don't know if you've ever noticed that. But I think that's an important thing. And I think the other thing that's important that I think that we do, and therefore if you're a consultant that you should be doing, is your job is to make a complicated subject simple. So to have that insight, but to be able to communicate it to people in such a way that they can understand. Because there are many, many people out there that are very clever and cleverer than I am, but they can't communicate it. They can't communicate their thought. Okay. Number 8. Oh, and sorry, under that customer piece, the other key thing.
Number 7B.
Yes. So this goes back to the value piece because this is important. Repeat business. Yeah. We get a lot of repeat business. We get a lot of customers who leave their company, who then join another company and go, hey, Colin, can you come in and do what you've just done? Well, you remember 3 years ago you did that. Can you come in and do that again? And it's great, clearly. Yeah. But they wouldn't do that again if they didn't think that we'd done a good job, provided the insights and done all the other things. Number 8, remember always, cash is king. Okay. And this goes back to your comment earlier about profitability. You know, one of the guys said to me once, which I thought was a great phrase: "Everything's funny when you're making money." Yeah, but we've gone through tough times. You know, in the recession or the Great Recession, tough times. Yeah, and in a small business, you tend to go from feast to famine, particularly when you're much smaller. It's always feast and famine. You've either got too much work on or not enough. But you've got to remember that cash is king. And also remember that you may have a mate who works for a company, a large company that that they employ you. Getting paid by that company is a different kettle of fish. Yeah, we have lots of really nice clients, and they have finance and procurement who I have to say can be a challenge sometimes, and particularly when it's just simple things like getting them to pay the bill when they say they're going to pay the bloody bill. Can be a nightmare basically.
Yeah, and consulting is hard because it's you often can't like withhold the delivery of a product until they pay.
Sure.
Like the service is the information, and once the information has been communicated, like you lose some of your leverage.
Yeah, and the problem you end up with is you don't want to that if you did that, that's hurting your customer.
Oh yeah,
that's not hurting finance
yeah.
or procurement. That's hurting your customer. Now, in my experience, again, if you're open and honest with your customer, they understand it, and they typically are also equally as frustrated with their finance groups and everything else. So anyway, I won't go down that rabbit hole, otherwise I'll wax lyrical about that. But remember that cash is king. Number 9 is experiment and adapt. Constantly come up with new ideas and experiment with them. One of our best-selling services that we provide is this emotional signature. You know it well. It's a way of looking at what drives value. If it wasn't for a couple of the guys, to be fair, that come up with that as an idea, and then us investing in it, and then trying it, piloting it with some customers, and trying those new things, you've constantly got to try new things and experiment and adapt.
Yeah, and do that in a smart way. Like, are you betting the firm that this next initiative is going to work?
Yes.
Or are you trying it out in some limited fashions that give you the opportunity to refine and make changes? And
yes,
because not everything you try will work.
No,
things
absolutely.
require some adaptation. So that's great.
Yeah. Last one I would mention is be focused. So what do I mean by that is the area of customer experience is actually quite vast.
Yeah.
And we could have gone into various different areas: employee experience, focus much more on journey mapping, whatever. But, it's a bit that phrase, keep to your knitting, do what you're good at. The danger is that you can get distracted by this new big shiny object over here. That actually think of the money you could make if you moved over there and did that, etc., etc. What you also do is you defocus on the area that you're good at. So I think being focused is another important one.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of different ways of thinking about that. There's the kind of the delivery. Maybe this goes back to creating customer value. Like, if you're distracted, if you are working outside of your area of expertise, like there's a good chance you're going to be delivering an inferior product.
Yes,
so
definitely.
that reduces the value you provide your customer.
Yes.
There's also a branding issue there. Like, if you're going to be known for something, particularly for a type of expertise, then diluting that brand by saying, "Oh no, we do." I remember I saw a moving truck once where the slogan on the side was, "We specialize in everything." Now, first of all, it was a moving truck. Like, how many types of moving are we talking about? That you're like specializing in. But I do feel like some companies take that approach where it's like, yeah, we'll do anything. Like we'll chase money anywhere that it comes from.
And
that can be especially tempting when you're a small firm.
It is. And you haven't got anybody else to tell you not to.
Yeah. And so, picking up extra work is great, but if your brand doesn't stand for something, it stands for nothing. And so if you're selling based on your expertise and you're not reinforcing that expertise, in the long term, that can be dangerous. So I think it's great.
Yeah.
A bit of advice.
Yeah, very much so. So those are the 10 things. So again, take a step back and I'll just run through them all as well as a summary. But if you are going to start your consultancy or thinking of doing it, then these 10 things that I think you need to think about. One is you need to be committed and brave. 2 is the whole area about having the right mindset, and I went through a number of things in there. 3 is be prepared for hard work. 4 is you need to complement your weaknesses, recognize your weaknesses and complement. 5 is make some long-term decisions, some long-term bets. 6 is have an original thought. You've got to think about the area you've got to zig when others zag, and you've got to think about what area you're going to differentiate yourself in. 7 is provide value to your customers or to your audience. 8 is remember cash is king. 9 is experiment and adapt. And 10 is be focused. And if you do all of that, then you stand a chance of being successful. And if you don't, then you won't, in my view.
Yeah, even if you do all of that, it's still going to be hard.
I agree. Totally agree.
It's going to be, the deck is stacked against you. But yeah, I think that's a great set of advice for somebody wanting to get started.
Good. Okay. And if you do, can I say do?
It's your podcast,
man. If you do those things and you are successful or you're not, or you want some advice, then just reach out to us on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to give some advice. So thanks very much, everybody. And we look forward to talking to you next week. Cheers. Thanks so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, please make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode.